So Naomi is like, okay, let me get this going. Part 6 of the Women in the Bible series. Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning into this segment of the Women in the Bible series. I'm going to jump right into where we left off, and we're going to be in the book of Ruth today for the most part. And then I'll talk about 2 other women in 1 Samuel, which is the book right after Ruth. And that'll be about it because Ruth talks about all of these women. So I'm going to go right into the story. Where we start in the book of Ruth is we're talking about a man named Elimelech. He is married to a woman named Naomi, and they're from Bethlehem in Judah. So there's a famine in the land, and to escape the famine, they decide to travel down to Moab. Now there's of course backstories with everything, but I'm not getting into all the backstories. I will say where in the Bible each of these women is mentioned, and that will be in the description box. So of course you can check anywhere in between the stories just to catch up on what took place. So I just hope that these stories provide some level of entertainment, if nothing else, because of course you can read these stories for yourself, but I just wanted to bring them to life by telling them here. So yes, they travel down to Moab due to a famine in the land in where they were from. It's just Elimelech, Naomi, and they have 2 sons, Kilian and Mahlon. Or Mahlon. They get down to Moab, then Elimelech ends up passing away, and the 2 sons, Kilian and Mahlon, they each end up marrying a Moabite woman. One of them marries a woman named Orpah, and the other one marries a woman named Ruth. We don't know which one marries who, as far as I can tell. And then 10 years pass, and then they pass away. And neither one of them have children, so Naomi is left widowed because Elimelech passed away, and her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, also are widows now because their husbands have passed away. So there's 3 women living together in Moab, and 2 of them are from that land. Of course, Naomi is not. So she finds out that the crops are starting to do well in Judah, back home in Bethlehem. So Naomi decides that she wants to go back to her homeland, and her 2 daughters-in-law go with her. But as they're on the road traveling back to Judah, Naomi tells her daughters-in-law, you know, you 2 are Moabite women. You can go back to your parents' home, back to your mother's house, and then you can remarry. And at first the women tell her, no, we want to stay with you. But then Naomi kind of like urges it a little bit to see, just think things through all the way and make sure this is what you really want to do. She's like, even if I were to get married right now and then have sons right away, are you actually going to wait until they grow up and then marry them? There's no one that I can bring you to like pass on the family name. So she's basically saying you'll have a better life if you stay in your land and go back to your parents' home. Orpah decides to do this. She kisses her mother-in-law and wishes her well, and she decides to go back. And then Naomi looks at Ruth and she's like, are you going to go too? You should go too. Naomi's like, she's going back to her people and back to her gods, because apparently most of the people in Moab didn't actually worship the true and living God. They had other small gods. So Naomi was telling Ruth, are you going to go back as well? And Ruth told Naomi, no, I'm not going back. I'm going with you. Your land will be my land. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you live, I will live. Where you go, I will go. And where you die, I will die. She was that committed to Naomi, and she said, nothing but death will separate us. So Naomi saw that she was serious. She's like, let's go, girl. We got this. I see you with me. So they went on, and when they arrived in the town where Naomi was from, of course, people that she knew were greeting her and calling her by her name, Naomi. She's like, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Naomi means pleasant, and Mara means bitter. She said that the Lord had made her life bitter. And Naomi was kind of complaining and saying, the Lord allowed me to suffer. I've suffered some tragedies. I went away full and I came back empty, because she had lost her husband and her 2 sons. And then I guess, I don't know if she's counting the loss of a daughter-in-law as well, but probably more so her husband and her sons. She's like, call me Mara. She was all upset, and that was that. They had arrived back in Bethlehem in late spring, and it was barley season. So Ruth asked Naomi if she could gather some grain in some of the fields that were around, because when people would harvest their crops, they would drop pieces, and she wanted to go scavenge and, collect all the pieces that the harvesters had dropped. So Naomi said, yes, this is fine. Go ahead and do that. And then Ruth ends up harvesting in a field that's owned by a very wealthy and influential man named Boaz. And Boaz is the son of Salmon and Rahab. And Rahab is the prostitute that I talked about in part 5. So if you want to check that out, feel free to do so. We'll link to that video and the full playlist down below. So she's collecting grain in Boaz's field. And Boaz is also a family member of Elimelech. He's called a kinsman redeemer. So he's a family redeemer. And what he can do, because he is part of the family and he's a close relative, he can restore these women back to a different position. Because right now there's no men in their lives. And Boaz is part of the family, so he can redeem them back and basically provide for the women and continue the lineage as well. One day Boaz comes back to his field and he sees Ruth out there and he doesn't recognize her. So he asks, who is that woman out there? And his foreman lets him know that's Ruth. She's a Moabite woman. She came back with Naomi and she's staying with her. And then the foreman also adds that she had come to him that morning and asked if she could harvest in the field, and that she had been working all day except for just a few minutes to rest. So letting him know she's a hard worker, she's been at it all day, and she lives with Naomi, and she's actually from Moab. And Boaz goes and tells Ruth, he's like, stay in this field, harvest whatever you want, follow closely behind the women that are harvesting, gather whatever you need, don't go to any of the other fields. He lets Ruth know, I told the young men here, don't bother you. They're not going to bother you. They're going to leave you alone and let you do your thing. So he was giving her his blessing to continue what she was doing, and in fact, don't even go to any other fields. Stay right here under protection. And then he also tells her, if you get thirsty, we have some water here, water that was drawn from the well, help yourself. So he was being the polite host, allowing her in, welcoming her in. And she's like all thankful and grateful. She falls at his feet. She's like, oh my, thank you for this. Why are you even being so nice to me? I'm a foreigner. You don't even know me. And so Boaz lets her know, I know all about you. I heard that you left your father, your mother, all of your family in Moab to live here in a foreign land with your mother-in-law, Naomi, and that you don't know anybody here. And the fact that you did that is commendable. So he was praising her, letting her know that he liked what she did. He respected her decision to do that. He said that he wished that God would reward her fully for what she had done. And she tells him, oh, you've comforted me with these words. Thank you so much. And even though I'm not one of your workers, you've welcomed me fully and you've made me feel at home. And she was happy about what he said to her. And then at mealtime, they would eat together. So Boaz welcomed Ruth over to have a meal. He gave her extra grain. He told her, help herself, have whatever you want, just eat up, pretty much. And she had so much that she was full from the meal, and she had leftovers even. So Boaz was fully accepting of her, and he was looking out for her. And then Boaz even went above and beyond, did the extra thing, and he told his young men, drop some full crops down purposely and let her get them. Don't try to gather everything. Leave a lot of scraps behind, and even leave full crops. Don't just leave little pieces. Let her pick up whatever she wants and don't give her a hard time. So he wasn't playing about Ruth, okay? He was like, Ruth is here. She's gonna be here, and y'all leave her alone. In fact, do some extra stuff for her. So at that point, Ruth had gathered so many crops, so much extra stuff. She went home and presented everything to Naomi. Naomi was astonished, like, where did you get all this from? Like, whose field have you been working in? Ruth lets Naomi know she's been working in Boaz's field. So Naomi is like, okay, let me get this going. And then Naomi also told Ruth, this is one of our closest relatives. And then Ruth told Naomi, Boaz even told her to come back until the harvest was completely done. Gather everything that you can until the harvest is done. And then, of course, Naomi encouraged her to stay in his fields. Don't go to any of the other fields because you won't be safe there, but you will be safe with him. And then Ruth continued working. She worked all the way through the barley harvest in the spring and then into the wheat harvest of the summer. So it implies that a good amount of time had gone by and she was still harvesting and collecting there. So at this point, Naomi decides she has to find some permanent provisions for Ruth, and I'm sure herself as well. She comes up with this plan and she tells Ruth to follow her instructions. And Naomi tells Ruth, take a bath, put on some perfume so you smell nice, and put on your nicest clothes. After Boaz has had his meal, because apparently there's a time they go to the threshing floor, and I'm not sure what that all signifies, but once he goes there, he would eat and then lay down and go to sleep. Naomi told Ruth, don't let Boaz see you. Now, when he's done eating though, and he lays down to sleep, uncover his feet and lay there at his feet. And he will be sleeping, but lay there with his feet uncovered, and then he'll take it from there. So Ruth did exactly what she was instructed to do. After he went to sleep, she uncovered his feet, laid there, and around midnight, Boaz woke up and he saw that there was a woman there. He's like, who are you? She said she was his servant Ruth. So Boaz realized what was going on. He knew what was up, and he's like, you're proving yourself to be even more loyal than you were originally by laying at his feet, because that was her way of like presenting herself to him. And he tells her, you could have gone after a younger man, a richer man, whether rich or poor, but instead you're presenting yourself to me. He's like, yes, I know that I'm a close relative, a family redeemer, but there is a closer relative, and I have to go through the proper procedures of allowing that family member to step in because he couldn't overstep. So he told Ruth, sleep here for the night. In the morning, I'm going to go talk to that family member, see what's up. If this other family member wants to marry you, then, let him marry you. But if he doesn't, let the Lord be my witness that I'll step in and marry you, girl. I got you. And I'm going to handle this for us. In the morning, Ruth got up before the light of day really started to break, because it wasn't proper for a woman to be seen at the threshing floor, and apparently Boaz let her know that she had to hurry up and get on out of there before anybody saw her. So it was the next morning, but the sun had not risen yet, and Ruth was able to get out of there before anybody saw her. But before she left, Boaz filled one of her cloaks with 6 big spoonfuls of barley grains so she could take it back to Naomi. He didn't want her to show up back at home empty-handed. And then when Ruth went back to Naomi, she told her everything that happened, and Naomi was like, we got this. This man is not gonna let the day go by before settling this situation. It's gonna be handled today. So just as he said, Boaz went out the next morning to the town gate, sat there, waited for this family member that he had talked about to come by. And when he did, he called him over. I want to talk to you. Family member took a seat. And then Boaz proceeded to gather 10 witnesses of people to come and witness their discussion and everything that they were going to be talking about. So Boaz presented to this other family member that Naomi was going to be selling Elimelech's land, and that this guy was the next closest, even closer than Boaz, to buy the land and redeem the family. And so the guy's like, sure, I'll take it. I'll buy the land. And then Boaz says, but you do also have to marry Ruth. She is the daughter-in-law, and she comes with the package. And at that point, that family member decided, no, he said that would mess up his own inheritance and his estate, and he didn't want to do that. So he said, you buy it, you go forward. The guy told Boaz, take it. And as a sign of the deal being sealed, the man took off one of his shoes and gave it to Boaz. And that just validated the transaction or the agreement. So Boaz looked at the witnesses and he's like, okay, before you all, this is what's being done. I, as of today, have bought the land from Naomi, the land of Elimelech, Kilian, and Mahlon, and he would also be acquiring Ruth. By their union, and then of course having children, Ruth would then have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and then inherit the lands from his family. the elders wished a blessing on Boaz and basically said, let Ruth be like Rachel and Leah, because they were the mothers of all the nations of Israel. And then Boaz took Ruth as his wife, and when Boaz and Ruth got together, she did become pregnant and she had a son. She named him Obed. All the women started to praise Naomi at this point. They're like, oh, you have Obed now. Let him be famous. Let Obed take care of you in your old age and help you to stay young and youthful and just take care of you. The women recognized that Naomi had been blessed because the family had been redeemed. And Perez is actually at the top of that lineage that all of these men were born out of. And Perez is one of the twins that Tamar had with Judah. And that story is in part 2, which is also linked below. Perez was the father of so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And Salmon was the father of Boaz. And Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. Jesse the father of David. And David's lineage is the lineage that Jesus was born from. So that's where we end with Ruth. It has a blessed ending. And the lineage that all these men were in is the lineage that Jesus was born from. Now we're into the book of 1 Samuel, and right at the beginning we learn about 2 women that are married to the same man. So there's a man named Elkanah. He's from the hill town of Ephraim. He's married to Hannah and Peninnah. Now Peninnah had kids, but Hannah did not. She was barren. She was upset that she didn't have any children. And there was a tabernacle in Shiloh that Elkanah and his wives would go to, and their family, the whole family, would go to Shiloh to worship the Lord and to offer sacrifices. And Elkanah would do that, would offer the sacrifices. And when he did so, he would give some of the meat to Peninnah and her kids, and he would give her portions for her kids. And to Hannah, he did love Hannah, no slight to her or anything, but he only gave her 1 portion because she was only one person. She didn't have any children. So Hannah would be upset about this, all the time crying, and Peninnah would taunt her and make fun of her because she didn't have any kids. And Hannah would cry and not eat. And then one day Elkanah asked Hannah, why are you crying? Why are you not eating? Like, you don't have any sons, but you have me. Am I not better than 10 sons? Now, I know that didn't make her feel any better. Maybe, no. I was going to say maybe a little bit, but probably not. She wanted kids. One particular year in Shiloh after the sacrifice, Hannah was crying and she was weeping and crying out to God, asking for a son. And she told God, if you are to give me a son, I'll give him back to you. And to prove that he's dedicated to you, his hair will never be cut. And Eli the priest, he was at Shiloh. I'm assuming he lived there. But he was at Shiloh and he saw Hannah praying and her mouth was moving, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. So Eli assumed she was drunk and told her, put away your wine. Why are you drunk? She's like, no, I'm not drunk. I haven't been drinking any wine or anything stronger. I'm in anguish. I'm pouring my heart out to God. I'm praying for something. And Eli's like, oh, well, gave her a blessing and said, may God grant you whatever it is that you want. And so she took that and she held on to that. She's like, he's blessing the prayer that I'm asking. And at that time, it didn't sound like he even knew what it was, but he said, may God grant you your request. She thanked him and went on her way. She went away happy after that. She was able to eat. She wasn't crying anymore. That gave her the confirmation that she needed, that this was going to actually happen. And then the family got up early the next morning. They worshiped the Lord and then they went home. And soon after, Elkanah and Hannah got together. And then she became pregnant and she had a son. She named him Samuel. And then when it was the next time for the family to go to Shiloh again, Hannah asked Elkanah if she could stay behind and wean the child. She was nursing him. She wanted to wean him first. And then once he was weaned, she would take him to the tabernacle and leave him there, because she had promised him to the Lord, and apparently that's what needed to happen. He needed to live at the tabernacle and be one of Eli's helpers. So time passed. Samuel was weaned, and then they took him to the tabernacle. They brought with them a sacrifice. One version of the Bible, the New Living Translation, says they brought a 3-year-old bull. The King James Version says 3 bullocks. So when they got there, it does confirm that a bull was offered as a sacrifice. They also brought some wine and flour. And so after the sacrifice was offered, Hannah approached Eli and she said, "Do you remember me? I'm the woman that was here several years ago. I was praying for a son. God granted me my request, and I have my son, and I'm giving him back to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord for his whole life." Eli worshiped the Lord, and they did in fact leave Samuel there to be Eli's assistant and to serve the Lord with Eli. And every year Hannah would make a small coat for Samuel, and whenever they would come there for their annual visits to Shiloh, she would bring the coats that she made for Samuel. And then Eli prayed for Elkanah and Hannah and asked that God would bless them with more children to take the place of Samuel. So Hannah ended up having 3 other sons and 2 daughters, and Samuel again lived permanently in the tabernacle and served the Lord there. And that is the story of Hannah and Samuel, and of course Peninnah as well. So that is all I'm going to get into for today. Stay tuned for part 7. We're close to the end of the women in the Old Testament, at least. So next we're going to be talking about David and different women that he was involved with, and a few others, and then everything will be closing out, and we'll end with Esther, I think. I have to look at the order again to make sure I'm not missing anyone, because again I'm looking at a specific list, but there might be others in there. So stay tuned for more, and thank you so much for watching. And again, I hope you're enjoying everything. I appreciate you being here. I'll see you in the next one.